Good morning, everybody. Next up in Net Zero Week, we have what I know is going to be a very interesting fireside chat conversation with someone with great experience of business transformation and innovation in the sustainability and digital space. That someone is Mike Nugent, the Chief Revenue Officer at Hitachi ZeroCarbon. Hitachi ZeroCarbon is a fleet decarbonisation business enabling the zero carbon transition and optimization of commercial fleets and public transformation. My name is Andy Walker. I'm a construction journalist and a contributor to Climate Perspectives magazine, which is a kind of sister publication to the organisers of Net Zero Week. Hitachi ZeroCarbon, who are also a sponsor of Net Zero Week, is on a mission to accelerate the global transition to zero carbon today in order to pioneer the world of tomorrow. And the company's vision is very much a world powered by zero carbon technology, where the global transition has driven a more profitable and more responsible future for business and the planet. Mike is an entrepreneur and someone who's been involved in change in the digital asset management and energy startup sector and with large corporations. He spent nearly 30 years in digital and business strategy, creating, reinventing and transforming businesses. He's someone who's passionate about deploying innovation and tech to combat our impact on the planet. And his role as Chief Revenue Officer of Hitachi ZeroCarbon is very much about transforming the mobility and energy ecosystem through new business models that transform the way organizations deliver zero carbon solutions. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. You know, how do we actually put this stuff into practice and deliver it on the ground? I'm going to kick things off with Mike very shortly, just to explain. If people have got any questions that they want to add to the questions that I've got for Mike, then please feel free to post them in the questions box, which is on the screen in front of you. Depending on the type of device you're using to access the event, it'll appear in different places, but it's got a question mark on it, so that gives you a helpful hint as to where that questions box is. Mike, you're very welcome, and thanks for joining us in this conversation this morning. Just going back to that vision of your company to accelerate the global transition to zero carbon today in order to pioneer the world of tomorrow. How are you going about that?
Yeah, great question. And I think I'm sure there'll be questions from people saying zero carbon, can you really achieve that? I think that the key first thing to say is we want to set our aspirations high. There's a big challenge ahead of us. You've got to aim for the stars, and even if you short fall of that, then there's some hint of glory. So that's what we're about. That's what we're trying to achieve. And look, we're really excited. I think some changes in our governmental structure mean that things are probably going to go quicker. But we see our role really as breaking down barriers. We want to bring tech, the capital markets, and investment and service all together, basically to build a platform for growth within the electrification and decarbonisation markets. We're all about how we can bring service, amazing technology and finance solutions to basically accelerate everything and try and drive and stimulate demand, but also break down those barriers that people see right in front of them in terms of both the implementation, but then the actual delivery of electrification and new decarbonisation systems.
Thanks, Mike. We'll get to those changes in government and what they might mean a little bit later. But for now, in your view, what are the challenges facing fleet managers today, and how will these challenges change over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think right in front of us, it's actually, well, how do we finance this stuff, and how do you really make sure you've got enough money to do what you need to do, but making sure that you're spending the money in the right areas and doing it at the lowest possible cost. I think interoperability is going to be a massive challenge, and what we mean by that is making sure that all of that tech that you put in this new system talks to each other, works effectively, and delivers the outcomes that you're trying to deliver. When we're dealing with fleets, the key thing we're thinking about here is how do we make sure that the vehicles leave the building or leave the depot with sufficient charge for their services. If you focus on that outcome, there's a lot of things that you need to make sure are working effectively in the background. So you've got to make sure you make the right tech choices. You've got to make sure you make the right decisions as to how much power you put in place. Those are the today things, and everything is very focused on that sort of deployment. But then really the challenges for tomorrow are all about, well, how do I make sure that this system works effectively, but also that I, have I got enough power? As more and more fleets electrify, the scarcity of power is going to become a really big challenge. So making sure that you have alternative sources to power, good backup, good resilience, I think is a key. And then overlaying all of this in this very turbulent world is cybersecurity and security of these systems. You've got to have that your mind really firmly fixed on that to make sure that your charge points for a lot of the organizations we work for would be classified almost as critical national infrastructure. So making sure that that system is not hackable, because if we all become reliant on electrified fleet, for example, and it gets hacked, what do? You can't deliver any services. Ambulances could be hit if they're electric. There's so much risk and danger. So there's a lot of challenges, and it can be quite scary. And that's one of the things that we're really focused on as well. How do we make that less scary?
So making it less scary, obviously there's a job of work to be done there. But obviously the way to persuade business is as I suppose in many ways, to appeal to a certain element of self-interest as well as the common interest. So what are the opportunities for organizations in transitioning their fleets to EVs?
Yeah, look, I think there's a whole digital transformation that's going on here. With this new tech, there's a lot of digital capability that we can bring to play. I think there's also a lot of cost and revenue opportunities. Fleets can be made more efficient, more effective, because we've got more data, more real-time information on how they operate, on their schedules, on how they can deliver their services in the most effective and efficient manner. So there's lots of cost opportunity, and the digitization of the system, I think, will make a very big difference, and is already making a difference for people that we're working with. But there's also a lot of opportunity around revenue. When we look at these fleet and their distributed depots, there's an opportunity for storage, there's an opportunity for generation, there's an opportunity for shared infrastructure. So there's a whole new stream of revenues that could be tapped into if you get this system right. If you think systemically today and put that system in tomorrow, and you think about the balances between near-term revenues, residual values, operational need, if you get the right balance and you're in control of that ecosystem, then you can actually deliver some pretty significant revenue opportunities. And we're already seeing that through very basic work around tariff optimization, but then grid services, V2G, shared infrastructure, B2B services. There's so much opportunity there, but you've got to start thinking about that today. That's absolutely critical. So having that mindset that this is a systemic change, and really thinking that this is actually an opportunity to transform digitally that whole operation, I think could bring some very significant advantages to those first movers in the market, the ones that are thinking strategically rather than tactically. Don't just buy what's the best vehicle or the best charge point of today. How does that fit into that ecosystem is going to be critical in terms of then making sure you're ready to take advantage of the opportunities that come in the future.
So turning to the question of money, because often it is about money, how will fleets finance this transition? And what are the differences for cars and vans, for example, compared to buses and HGVs?
Yeah, I think look, the finance challenge is significant. We've got a party that we're talking to around EHGV, and they've calculated that to electrify the depots for their need would be as much as their entire turnover for a year. They simply don't have access to that level of funding themselves. So there's actually a really interesting inflection point happening. There's a lot of money out there that wants to go into green and sustainable solutions. The biggest challenge has been, well, where do you actually focus that money? Who are the conduits? And there are some great companies out there. We obviously see ourselves as one of those, but providing the capability and the ease with which that finance can be provided, providing the accessibility to the finance markets, but then providing the right kind of capital opportunity to companies to say, well, I'm going to do things differently. I've traditionally bought my vehicles. I've traditionally bought any other infrastructure. To go into a different mindset around finance leasing or as a service provision is key. So we see that across the entire industry, but there is a very specific difference, I think, between HGVs and buses, where you've got very big batteries, and a large proportion of the delta in cost between a diesel or petrol vehicle and an electric vehicle is the battery, the cost of the battery. And it's also, at this point, seen as the riskiest asset. So that is actually very attractive to some finance companies that want to say, well, that's an asset that actually maybe we could, if we've got the right kind of services, we can extend the life, and that has great balance sheet opportunities. With like commercial vehicles and cars, certainly for fleet, that's very much more dominated by a lease mindset. So actually a lot of the risk doesn't actually reside with the fleet operator. A lot of that risk will reside with the fleet provider, the lease plans, the Mitsubishi Capital Vehicle Solutions, all of those types of organizations. Those organizations actually take on that risk. So we're working with those companies to go, well, actually, there's a residual value opportunity there, and there could be finance there. But for the fleet operator of LCV and car, then it's probably more about the financing of the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, and the grid connections. And again, there's still another opportunity for finance in that area as well. So there are kind of different areas of opportunity, and risk. But then that's where the finance markets they like a little bit of risk, not too much, and they love solutions that help you manage that risk and help fleet optimize the opportunity through the electrification process.
Thanks, Mike. I don't know about you, but and maybe it's just because I'm interested in this area and I work, within the sector, albeit on the media and comms side. But we all get so many deliveries now, in our houses and everything else, and I'm often looking to see whether or not that they've arrived in an EV. Some of them do, but far too many of them don't. So, I don't know that it's just me, but I still see many fleets using petrol or diesel power. In your view, as someone who works within it, is the sector moving quickly enough to transition at the pace that's required?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think if I sort of extract myself from the day job, I think if we look at it from a global macro perspective, first of all, the simple answer is absolutely not. I mean, you only have to look at the headlines outside of elections and look at Switzerland and Austria last week with the floods, the Californian wildfires that I don't think have got much press yet, but they're, state of emergency in North California. And of course, Hurricane Beryl, which I think has now come back as a hurricane, about to slam into Texas. So there's no question in my mind that we need to move quicker. And I think actually, if we come to sort of the governmental point of view, certainly from a UK perspective, that lack of consistency in policy has been had a significant impact on the entire EV market. The shock of the switch. Initially, the focus was on 2030, back to 2035. There's mooting, although they've not come round to environment yet on a daily basis for the new government. But the hints are that it's going to come back to 2030. It's going to change the economics completely, because what we've really seen is a bit of a collapse in the second-hand market for EVs. So the lease companies are really struggling to encourage fleet operators to electrify. And where's the incentive? If you're looking at a 4 or 5 year cycle for an electric vehicle for our last mile delivery fleet, if it's 2035, why would they bother? They're going to go for the cheapest option. Of course they are. And they're going to be less worried about TCO opportunities. The whole shift of focus has gone away from EV it's very short term, and it needs to come back. So I think it needs to move quicker. I think you'll see, there are some companies which are obviously a little bit more headline making and a little bit more sort of public services associated, and some that have greater level of values associated with sustainability, and they're going to keep pushing. But it's with respect, it's a big capital outlay, There is a TCO opportunity, but it's hard for smaller last mile delivery operators to even think about that at this point, especially if there's no incentive or no driver through policy to do that. So I think it's not moving quickly enough. I think policy is going to play a role. I think we and the private sector have to play a role to make that TCO more attractive and provide more exemplars of excellence as to how new fleet can be provided in an electrified basis that actually delivers significant cost advantages to organisations.
So you talk about incentivization there, and you mentioned about the government moving the year of that target back to 2030, which I think will happen. Apart from that, how can we incentivize companies to do more? Is there a role for government to actually put some money on the table? Bearing in mind that it's been very reticent to talk about putting money on the table for almost anything over the election campaign. So, what about those incentives? What do they look like?
Yeah, look, I think subsidy is going to be really scarce. It's pretty clear that the fiscal rules are not really going to change. So I think there was talk prior to the election around mobilisation of PPP type solutions, and we're already deploying similar solutions alongside partner organisations like First Bus, where there's co-finance of debt and equity. The role of government in that to lower the cost of capital could be quite significant. So a small amount of government equity could play a big role, certainly in public services type organisations that perhaps need a little bit of stimulation. But I think we need to be smarter in the private sector by bringing that finance into play. But more importantly, there is an educational role, and today as part of that education is to evangelize around the opportunity of, if you've got really good tech that brings real time data, you can transform the way that you deliver your services. If you've got good finance, you can actually access and tap into really low cost of capital opportunities that really shift the dial when it comes to how organizations can finance their electrification. And we're looking at models of shared residual value benefit as well. So making sure that it's not something that the financiers walk away with the cash in their pockets of all of that upside from residual value. We've built models which are actually all about sharing in that opportunity, sharing in the risk, sharing the opportunity, mobilize a huge amount of capital that wants to come into this, but don't let them monopolize all of the revenue and the profit opportunities. And then the final part I think is crucial here is to let industry know that they don't have to do this alone. Fleet operators are experts in delivering fleet. They're not experts in delivering electrification. They're not experts in charge points, in battery management. There are organizations like ourselves that are here to provide the support services to assure that these services can be delivered, which again can tap into really good low cost of capital and new finance opportunities. So we've got to play a role in this. We have to really take responsibility, and that's what zero carbon is all about, is how do we take responsibility and drive the decarbonisation, make this simpler, make it less scary, make it more accessible to as many fleet as we possibly can.
So you spoke earlier you talked about companies who have maybe a more kind of social kind of approach, a reputation for kind of doing the right thing. Um, me flipping that, is there a demand from customers across the board for fleets, for organisations, for businesses to move more quickly in this area, so that hopefully we can make it almost the norm for the companies that are operating to be more, social value aware, if you like?
I think there is. But one of the things we're trying to crack within zero carbon is, how do you bring capitalist economics to the world of sustainability? And ultimately, a lot of organizations have all of the right desires, but they don't have the access to the cash. They don't have and it seems too risky. And if there isn't the policy driver, then it's a real challenge. So ultimately we see in different sectors, we've seen last mile delivery is probably the biggest expansion in fleet electrification, but they're now beginning to hit the problems of interoperability, because they've deployed lots of different charge points, lots of different vehicles that don't necessarily talk to each other. So they've kind of created problems, and we're working in the bus sector to try and avoid some of those, to be a little bit more uniform, a little bit more economies of scale and scope based. I think HGV, we're working on the Innovate UK HGV program. There is a lot of demand and desire. One of the biggest, we've been to amazing sites where there are huge amounts of vehicles from multiple different hauliers, last mile delivery providers. If they all go about it and think about it all separately and think, well, I need to get the power in so I can power my fleet, in those sites, that it's going to be just a bidding war for D&O services. We need to be more coordinated. So part of this is sort of, I think there's the demand, but how do we stimulate the right kind of demand and the right focus around hubs, and get a mindset of hubs and shared infrastructure? Thinking about essentially shared infrastructure is a natural monopoly product. And we got to think, well, let's not waste and duplicate all of that and just slow everything down. How do we ease that? So, yeah, the demand is there, but I think, and we've got to find smart ways to help that demand move quicker. It's got to be about providing real evidence of total cost of ownership benefit. It's about providing real access to new hub thinking, and providing access to that right kind of finance, and then putting the technology in place that says, okay, fleet operator, we recognize you want to continue to buy what is best in the market at that time. That will cause problems from an electrification point of view, but we have the tech that will allow you to make sure that everything talks to each other, and you can look at your fleet as a whole through a single pane of glass rather than in a piecemeal basis. And you're not, so we want to avoid people hardwiring inefficiency into their new fleets. So there's the demand there. We've got to work out what is the best means by which we can deliver the supply.
I think you made a really important point, Mike, when you talked about one of the conundrums is introducing, working in a sustainable way, but introducing it into capitalist economics, which I think is actually one of the nubs of the issues here. And I'm interested in what you were saying just then, and also, the concept of shared charging hubs, because particularly the world we now live in now, people want stuff wherever they are. They want that interoperability. They want to just be able to plug and play. How does that work? How does that fit in an economic environment where that's traditionally been built upon it's just this company or it's just that company? How do we get people to take a more, in inverted commas, Catholic approach with a lowercase c in the way in which they work with other organizations? Because kind of that's a bit counterintuitive to the basic 2 up, 2 down capitalist model that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, look, it's a massive challenge, and it's one we're trying to embrace. I think essentially we've seen there are a number of different players that are coming in on the private sector side that see this opportunity, who want to put in hubs. But I think there's also a role to play within the trade associations, to actually work alongside them and say, look at this park. Rather than you all bidding for the same amount of power, why aren't we just, and it just being something that becomes a bidding war, why aren't we getting together and creating a centralized focus? It doesn't change the efficiency of the service. But look, I think we've got to get into a mindset that the future market for this is going to be about accessibility to kilowatt hours. And that actually creates, and if we're talking about the capitalist economics piece of that, that creates an amazing opportunity for organizations that are willing to take the risk. And if they think strategically, where are you going to put these hubs? Where am I going to actually focus my activities? But also, where do I have land that could be used? Again, we can come back to some of that opportunity piece that I talked about earlier. New revenue opportunities through land, through accessibility to power is going to be a really crucial part of this. So open-mindedness to the opportunity. We're going to be certainly reaching out to government and saying, look, there should be a more coordinated approach to this. How can you help us stimulate a more focused activity? The Innovate UK work that we're doing with GridServe is all about that kind of activity. So government has a role to play, private sector has a role to play, and I think a recognition that there isn't going to be enough power if you all go for it all at the same time. And even if we all go for it in the right way, it's still going to be a bit tight and a bit squeaky. So how do we manage that effectively and try and think strategically? It's very difficult in fleet because fleet is a very day-to-day operational business, and we're trying to get people to think longer term. But we're having some really interesting conversations. I think there's an open-mindedness to this because they all recognise this is a challenge that everybody has to face up to.
You mentioned there about well earlier on about the changes in government means that things potentially going to go quicker in this area. Can you just kind of amplify that a little bit and talk about what you think we might see that might be different in this sector going forward?
Well, yeah, I don't have Darren Jones on the hotline, but I think as much as it would be fun, I think look, I think it's got to be about setting. I think clarity of policy is really crucial here. I think from a net zero point of view, we've not really had that clarity without getting into the politics of it. But I think more importantly, it looks like we're heading to a more consistent, more calm, more measured approach to the decarbonisation challenge. I think that will help. I think also then, as we've touched on already, the potential for bringing forward the policy change to 2030 again, I think will have a massive stimulative effect, and it will help correct some of the problems that we've seen in the marketplace. So I think that's really the crucial part of from a policy point of view that we can see. I think there may be things that we can do, and as I said, touching on sort of more coordinated activity without it being sort of structured economy type thinking, but perhaps a little bit more structure and a little bit more smart thinking around shared infrastructure, I think is going to be set in an area that Hitachi are going to be working with government to say there's a better way of doing this that doesn't waste anybody's money, particularly the public purse.
So just on that, on working I suppose in many ways it's about working together and collaboration, which I think, given the importance of this sector and how it just has to work in order to achieve net zero, how we all have to work to achieve net zero, much more collaboration, much more innovation being brought to bear. Looking at the area of sharing things, particularly data.
Mm.
What's your view on that? What kind of data will fleet managers need in the future? What will they have available to them? And how will that be applied in order to make a difference?
Yeah, look, I think everybody talks about data, but it's very rare that people manage to monetize it, right? Everybody always says, "Oh, there's going to be all this amazing data." I think we're going to have to be really smart about this. There's lots of really good information around charging, around power, around need and what is actually needed for the services, but then around opportunity. So if we focus on those four things around charging, it's about how do you optimize charging? How do you make sure you only put the amount of electrons into a battery that you need to? In terms of power, it's then about making sure you only access the power that you need at the right time. So it could have an impact on the way that the fleet schedule. I think need is then really linked to those schedules and the way that the service is delivered. But I think also then opportunity. When do I need to buy, and could I sell that energy or that capacity? Those are going to be the things that are going to become really important in terms of fleet management. But most importantly, let's treat the electrification process as an opportunity to really make our deliveries more efficient and effective, and make sure that we're thinking smart around schedules, thinking smart around power, and making sure that we're as efficient and optimized as we possibly can be, and using that data in a smart way, because that's how you monetize the opportunity.
And just finally, Mike, given your involvement in the sector, obviously recent political events and so on and so forth, how optimistic are you for the future that we can make the changes that are needed going forward?
I can only really go on our direct experience. I think there's amazing opportunity. So I'm very optimistic. I think we're probably 5 to 10 years late from a global point of view. So we've got a lot of catching up to do, but I think we need to. It probably longer. I think we just got to work really hard to deliver on this. I am optimistic. I think we're creating the industry that I'm a part of are creating amazing exemplars of excellence to demonstrate the opportunities.
Okay, Mike, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but thanks very much indeed for
My
your
pleasure.
insights, and certainly good luck to you and your colleagues in these forthcoming conversations with government. It's clear, that the government are in listening mode, and hopefully they'll also be in doing mode going forward as well. So thanks very much to Mike Nugent, the Chief Revenue Officer at Hitachi ZeroCarbon, for taking part in this fireside chat conversation with myself. You can rejoin us for the rest of Net Zero Week with a very interesting conversation at 11 o'clock, which I would urge everyone to log on for. But for now, Mike, thanks very much indeed for taking
Pleasure. Thanks,
part.
Andy.
Thank you.
Bye.